be aware of the extent to which who I am, how I've presented myself, is affecting the people around me in a field of practice. I'm working backwards. I also need to be aware of the extent to which being a researcher in fields of practice, fields of inquiry, can kind of influence. If I present myself as a sociologist versus as a NASCAR fan, that's going to change some things. And then certainly I have to be kind of reflecting back on what it means to be someone who's trying to answer questions in the first place in the way that I am, right? Because that's what would have brought me into that space, to do that ethnography, to be reading that theoretical text, whatever it might be. So constantly kind of working through that triangle is important, and always being mindful of what that's doing, not only to you, but to the folks in those different fields. The second one, I think, has more to do with subjectivity or with positionality, right? And it's the idea that I bring with me a unique history, a unique set of identities, politics, a unique set of kind of experiences. And that's going to guide everything that I do through that triangle I just talked about. I mean, I need to always be mindful of and reflecting on the extent to which being a white guy from Appalachia who had these life experiences, has these politics that he's bearing upon his projects, is shaping who I am, what I'm doing, and so on. It's an extremely long definition, but to me that makes sense.
No, of course. I think no, I appreciate that. And with that, I guess more tangentially, what does that look like in your work when you are practicing this firsthand, whether it's an ethnographic study or the whatnot? How do you practice reflexivity? I know you kind of mentioned the two prongs there, but I guess more in practice, what does that look like for you?
Sure. Well, I think in terms of research practice, so in this case being co-present, being an ethnographer, an interviewer, whatever it might be, I think it does mean trying to both present yourself and kind of make sure that you record the material in a way which gives you a sense of how that might all be influencing what you're doing. So if I'm at a NASCAR race, collecting kind of quote-unquote data through ethnography, I need to think about what it means for me as a white guy who has a little bit of a Southern accent to get access to certain things that it might influence how people speak to me, what they say, all the, whether I am seen to belong or not belong in the space, so on. So always thinking about that, keeping sort of, a kind of running dialogue with those field notes as to what it might mean if someone else were to come into that space and try to do the same types of research, ask the same kinds of questions, and so on. And then second, I think in terms of representational practice, so actually writing up manuscripts, for example, I need to make sure, this gets us full circle maybe, that I'm being honest with the reader, right? This is who I was, this is how I presented myself, and this is the extent to which that presentation of me and of my racial kind of identity might have had some effect on why this person said what they said or what they did, and so on. So I think both those things are super important to me.
No, of course. And I guess extrapolating this out to our discipline more broadly, sport management that is, I know it's been touched on in recent years. I know Dr. Singer, Dr. Shaw, Hober, they, at least to a certain extent, at least advocated for the use of more reflexive practices within our research processes. Do you feel like honestly, it's important, obviously. You could say this is a certain level of truth that is important for our field, or any field for that matter, where conduct these kinds of studies, or just any study in general. But do you think that sport management has a little bit more to go in terms of actually fully adopting this appropriately?
Sport management as a field has about as far to go as anywhere in the world, any field in the academy. I think sport management gets away with a lot by claiming it's nascency. We're a new field, we're emerging field, we're just sort of getting our kind of bearings. I think also, we're just studying sports. So I think we've, in many ways, evaded some of the real critical epistemological considerations that other fields have been given, right? If you're working with communities of color and it comes to homelessness, some pretty serious questions people are being asked. If you're working with, women who are survivors of sort of violence in some way or another, there's very serious questions that are being asked of the researcher. sport tends to get a pass on some of these things. And so I think that there's an incredibly small community of scholars who are trying their best to kind of start working through some of these things. But as a percentage of the field of sport management researchers more generally, I think it's something we haven't done we have so far to go, and I think it's actually quite critical.
For sure. I guess I'll ask you just more of a wrap-up question. So you can make the argument that with our discipline, I guess more broadly, if you want to extrapolate out to the sporting context more broadly, as well as back into, at least at the lower level in terms of us as researchers in academia, you could say that obviously we're operating within a wide space. So in a lot of ways, we're working with these assumptions, we're working with these perceptions, we're working through these cultural frames that are at the same time normalizing as well as perpetuating whiteness to a certain extent.
Yep.
And in this manner, it's kind of hard to at least shake from that because, I mean, it's structurally strapped to our society and our beings inherently. So with that in mind, do you feel that white researchers who are doing this type of research, race-based that is, with or on communities of color, do you feel that bearing that all in mind in terms of these assumptions, these perceptions, these frames that we're operating under in terms of our perceptions, do you feel that it's truly appropriate for us to be at least conducting this kind of research?
Great question. That's maybe the big elephant kind of in the room question some days. I've struggled with this probably as much as anything. To what extent should community outsiders or folks who don't identify with certain communities, and this could be based on race, it could be based on gender, it could be based on so many different other things as well, right? Should they be entering into these communities and then providing some authorial or interpretive kind of expertise or even gaze upon these communities, right? And I think I do think it's an incredibly important question. For me, this is how I've kind of come to terms with it. We all kind of live in the world, and given the idea of sort of intersubjectivity and intersectionality, that there's so many things that come in to me and over the course of my life to make me who I am. We all kind of have some overlap. And we all have tons and tons of difference, and every person is pretty unique in this regard. But there are points of intersection where we do come together in some way. And I do think it's important for scholars, particularly, let's say, white scholars who are working in communities of color, to acknowledge where there's points of overlap and where there's points of, sort of disassociation. And I think if you're honest with yourself and you're honest with the people in those communities and say, hey, look, I'm here, and I really have a passion to kind of work in and with this community about issue X. And I think we have some common ground here that we can work from. But I also let you know, I'm a white dude, and I don't know what it's like to be sort of, sort of self-identifying African American in South Tallahassee. I've never experienced homelessness, but I do think if by way of our interaction, you might get some benefit of this and out of this, and let me explain what it is. I think as long as we're pretty transparent and forthcoming about who we are and what we're trying to achieve and honest about that, then I think there is a place for all of us to kind of work together in those ways. But I certainly think if your point is to be there to make a group more vulnerable by way of your research or whatever it might be, to expose things which could hurt them personally or even, as a broader community or group, I think that sort of work we don't have too much business engaging with as researchers. That's just my opinion, though.
No, of course. I think that was very poignantly put. I do appreciate that response. I guess that was pretty much all I have. I guess this is the point where put it back to you, I guess, if there was any other questions that you'd like to revisit, anything that you might want to go back to or expand upon, or anything that you'd like to tell me that I haven't asked at this point.
No, I think you've done a great job. Very good, very professional conduct. Very neutral kind of responses to my my yarns. I think it's great. Are you? How many folks are you going to try to talk to? If I'm allowed to ask that.
Sure. I mean, obviously, I'll give you the true qualitative response until saturation. I would say about maybe 10, 12. I would hope for.
Yeah.